Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video, you have the next episode of Recent Reads, which is, I think, week 2 of the amazing Readathon. Yes, I'm still doing Magical Readathon, but I haven't entered anything in for that one yet. But let's go ahead and take a look at what I have read this week. So I've read 2 books via audiobook because I did several days this week just read in the evening instead of stopping and cross-stitching as well. I think the first one that I tackled was the one for Sao Paulo, where the prompt was to have 3 or more people on the cover. And for that one, I chose Escape from Aurora by Jamie Littler. This also fulfills one of my Magical Readathon prompts, which I forget which one it is, but it's recommended by a bookseller. And so I chose this one because, you know, when Gavin recommended this, he was a bookseller. I remember earlier this year reading the first in the series, falling head over heels in love with it. And then when I was reading this, I was a little bit, I just was missing that same connection that I had. And obviously I'm not going to go into the plot of this book or the next one, which, spoiler alert, is the 3rd book in the series because it's a series. But the setup for the first book is Ash is basically kicked out of this town that he's lived in, where his parents basically dropped him off, and he's been living with a series of guardians, and no one wants to take care of him because he's a song weaver. And there's prejudice against song weavers because they can communicate with the Leviathans, and these are these really strange, deadly creatures that live out in the snow. And they think that song weaving lets the Leviathans come and take control of their mind. Well, through a series of events, he ends up on this sleigh that's like a ship called the Frostheart. And that's, you know, the series, the Frostheart series. And with his guardian, his last guardian in that town, a Yeti named Tobu. This continues that story. But for me, it felt a lot like middle book syndrome. It was a lull, and I didn't really see where we were going. We weren't making good strides. At least I thought so. And then there's a major reveal at the end that made me think, oh, okay, I'm intrigued again now. So this just felt like classic middle book syndrome. Again, I haven't been great at keeping up with my online records, so I haven't put this through Compile yet, but I'm thinking it's going to get a 4-star. So book 1, 5 stars, book 4, 4 stars. And I think that this last one here, Rise of the World Eaters, it definitely redeemed the series. It definitely brought it back up and ended it on a high note, but I don't think it's going to get the same 5 stars that the first book got. And again, not going to go into all of the details here, but I think that the way that Ash is really exploring the idea of his found family of the Frostheart, that sleigh that he joined in the first book, and his actual family, and his connections with the other song weavers, because a lot more song weavers come into the story throughout the trilogy. I think that was really well explored between these 3 books, and especially this last one. Now, the actual ending, I was a little confused on how this resolution actually came out, you know, how it actually finished and the magic was resolved, but it's a middle grade book. I'll give it to him. It doesn't have to be firm, wrapped up, fully explainable. I really do think, though, that Jamie Littler he definitely had the whole scope in mind when he started writing this series, and I still really enjoy all of the illustrations that he does himself that are scattered throughout both of these books. So I ended up finishing both of these books. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this one out for one of my other prompts that I had for Magical Readathon, which was to finish a series. Okay, so this one I think I actually read next, and I had it pulled out because, again, it has 3 people on the cover. So I read this as sightseeing to get to Sao Paulo. No, let me try that again. I read this one to get to Sao Paulo, and then I read this one as sightseeing. So if you want more details on that, that's definitely in brief for Pause in a Book. It's all in there on that channel. So this next one I had pulled out as an option for sightseeing, but I ended up using it for the next prompt, which is to get us to London, which is, you know, kind of fitting because this book takes place on a very small town in coastal England. And that was a retelling. Now, this is not a strict retelling of a specific Agatha Christie mystery, but it is basically a middle grade version of an Agatha Christie mystery where you have Agatha Morton as the main character and her friend Hector Poirot. So, you know, Hercules Poirot. I don't think I said that right. But anyway, in this story, and I've since discovered that there's only 4 books in the series, which is kind of sad, but I do want to read them all. And reading this made me think, yes, I think I need to try the cozy mystery, the detective sort of genre that this is in. She loves solving mysteries. She has what I think her mom calls her morbid imagination. And at her dance studio, I think, she ends up trying to go back to get her notebook. And when she goes there, she sees, oh no, there's a dead body under the piano. Yeah, the body under the piano. And so she spends the book trying to figure it out. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's a feel-good sort of easy read that I definitely think that middle grade students would enjoy. The only thing about this particular copy, I bought this off of Thrift Books because this is also my Buzzwordathon book for the month. And you're not supposed to sell ARCs, but this is an ARC copy. So I bought a book thinking it was in good condition in the final copy, and I got an ARC copy. So that brings us to Face Off Weekend, which is this current weekend, and I'm not reading as much for it, which I think is fine, but I am trying to do a little bit because I don't have a lot of retellings either. And retellings is the London prompt that's ongoing. But in Face Off Weekend, there's a spinner wheel full of European countries, and whichever one you get, your book has to have those colors, the colors of the flag, on it. A lot of my books don't have typical flag colors on them, but I've managed to find a few. And the first flag that I got, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was Portugal, but it was one that had 4 or 5 colors on it because it had the stripes and then it had a symbol in the middle. And so for that I chose Now You Say Yes, which is one of my SEASL books. And I believe it's a middle grade book, although the protagonist is clearly in high school. So in this, you have Mari and her brother Connor. And at the setup, her mom has some sort of heart thing that happens suddenly, and then she ends up passing away. Now, they have an untraditional sort of family. The dad has pieced out. He's basically abandoned them. He's off finding himself overseas somewhere. And the mom has tried to keep things together, but has felt this need to have some guy in her life. And there's a guy involved, but he doesn't really like the kids. Mari was adopted around when she was 6 years old, and she has what a lot of people would call behavior issues, but it's basically all of the trauma that was inflicted on her when she was a child and just how she's dealing with that. She is now, I believe, 15 or 16 at the start of the story. And her parents, the mom and the dad that pieced out, thought they could never have kids. And that's why they adopted Mari. And then I think like 4 or so years after she was living with them, or maybe less than that, they end up pregnant and they have Connor. But Connor is on the autism spectrum. And so when her mom dies and she finds out about that, she panics because she does not want to go back in the system. She does not want to be separated from Connor. And she doesn't like her mom's current boyfriend. And so basically this book is her making her way home, getting their stuff, getting her mom's car, and get this, it's acknowledged she doesn't have a license, but driving cross country from, I think, somewhere in California to somewhere north of Massachusetts to where their grandma is. She's so nervous at the beginning to drive. I'm like, and yet she drives thousands of miles and doesn't really have a lot of major issues. I've driven cross country. It's not easy. That aside, in this story, Mari's really the protagonist. She's the one driving the narrative. I don't know why this is considered middle grade. According to this, it's young adult. So maybe it is on the young adult list, but I'm not remembering correctly. But she goes through a lot. She's learning a lot. There's a lot of flashbacks that help explain things. But the way that everything just nicely falls into place, it really bothered me. Like, there was a lot of really tough stuff that they were having to deal with, and a lot that doesn't really get explained, and then we just have to go with it. So I think ultimately this is probably going to end at a 3.5 stars. It might squeak out of 4 stars, but probably not. But this does get some, not exactly points, but it goes towards hopefully helping my team on face-off weekend. And then the last book that I've read physically this week, I probably will start one later, but I don't know which one that is. That is Witch King by Martha Wells. And the flag that I got for this one was France, and you might think France is red, white, and blue. Well, counting this as red, white, and blue. I'm counting it because I don't have those exact shades on there. I went into this with lowered expectations because a lot of people have said this is not her best work. This does not live up to her Murderbot series, which I haven't read yet, but it's on my to-read list. I found myself really engaged with this story. Now, do I think that it's perfect? No. But I think something that helped with this story is reading at least the first 2 books in the Ruin of Kings series. Because in the Ruin of Kings series, you have a lot of narrative shifts. You have like souls being switched and etc. Which is a similar, not the same, but a similar concept to some of the things that are happening in here with the demons and the titular Witch King. They end up coming back. That used to be this agreement where they would come back and inhabit the body of a recently deceased person. Like they wouldn't possess somebody, but it was usually for some sort of purpose, like to hear the last words of the dearly departed and maybe bear some kids for them to continue the family line. Or like in one case they were brought back and the person had been murdered and it was to tell the name of the murderer. There's this basically another race or group of people who has started to basically take over the world, and they're basically killing everybody and just wiping everything out, taking all the power, and they end up wiping out the clan, the people group that Kai, the main character, it's really connected to, because his grandmother is somehow now trapped and permanently in the under earth where the demons are, but it's tied to this people group. There are 2 narratives going on, 2 timelines. Also, that's another similarity to the Ruin of Kings series, or the Course of Dragons, I should say. They end up merging, but a whole lot later in the book. They don't end up coming close to each other until this very last portion of it. And even then, it doesn't actually, tie off the gap where we've actually brought these 2 timelines together and there's stuff missing. And that's the part that leaves me a little bit like, wait, I want to know more, but I don't think this is a series. There's some connections from how we got from the past timeline to the current timeline. And I really enjoyed the cast of characters and the way that the relationships between them were built, and how Kai was dealing with all sorts of things, both in the past timeline and in the present timeline. We did not get enough of, I can't remember her name, Sanja. And I really enjoyed her character. There were a lot of characters that basically kind of got short shrift because of the dual timeline and the fact that this book isn't a lot longer or multiple series. I think this one book could have easily been a duology with a little bit more expanded in there. Still keep the dual timeline, but like bring it to resolution or whatever, like halfway, etc. How you're supposed to write a duology. So I think this is really intriguing enough that I think this is going to get a 4 stars for me. I'm definitely going to keep it on my shelves. Not this copy, because this is one of those duplicates. This is the Caffeine and Legends version, but I'm going to actually keep, and I don't know where I put it, but I'm going to actually keep my Illumicrate version with the purple sprayed edges. One thing I do have to say though, and I think I mentioned this when I unboxed this because it had a book plate in there, that's not a signature. Those are scribbles, Martha Wells, because yeah, can't even tell any letters on that. But anyway, this is really intriguing, and I really appreciated the thought that she put into this whole world, and it really gets me excited to read some of her other works that a lot of people rave about. All right, so now that brings me to the books that I've read as audiobooks, and I have a phenomenal book to talk about in just a little bit. The first one that I'm going to talk about is This Vicious Grace. This is also, this is a Fairy Loot book, one of the oldest Fairy Loot books that I hadn't read yet. And in this world, there are ties to Italian culture, I think, because a lot of the language, the old language used in here is Italian. But in this world, I think it's every 5 years or so, you know how cicadas in our world, they have a breeding, hatching cycle of 17 years. It's kind of like that. Only these creatures are massive and deadly. And so every 5 years, there has to be a Fenestra, and she has to choose a Fonte. And the Fenestra can amplify and use the power of the Fonte to defeat these creatures. Now, the main character in here is a Fenestra who keeps killing her Fontes, but not on purpose. It's like she takes too much of their power and she takes their life force with that. A lot of people, this has caused doubt, and there's this priest going around sowing doubt against her so that people are trying to kill her. They're saying she's a fake Fenestra, she's a false Fenestra, and we need to kill her so we can get a real one so that we can be protected against these creatures. And a lot of the Fontes are fleeing this island so that basically she doesn't choose them and they die. She encounters this other gentleman who has also been God's touched in some sort of way. It's not as a Fenestra, not as a Fonte. And she needs a bodyguard. So she hires him as a bodyguard and then later finds out this other thing about him. And of course, yes, he does turn into the love interest. But I appreciate that Emily Thede does not like bring him in automatically as the love interest. Although when he shows up, you know that that's what he is. The solution that they end up coming up with, I'm like, I was thinking of that from the beginning. So that part was a little bit frustrating. But I think that the way that this author dealt with both, on one hand, these people reviling her and being built up by this false priest who, as soon as something goes slightly differently, automatically switches and is like building her up. He's a despicable character. I enjoyed this. I thought it was really fascinating, really well done. Is it perfect? No. Do I want to read the second in the series? I think it's just a duology. Yes. So I think this one's going to garner a 4-star. Now, I was nervous to pick up this next book because of how much I loved and adored the first book by this author. This author's debut, a book that was on my top 10 books of the year last year. And then I heard some people who also loved that book raving about this one as well. And I went, okay, if they loved the first book and they love this book, I probably will also love this book. And that is Warrior Girl Unearthed by Angeline Boulley. And in this book, it's set in the same town, same area, with many of the same characters that you saw in Firekeeper's Daughter. It's about 14-ish years after, or maybe 12-ish years after. And so Donis, the main character, is a minor character in this book. And the main character, Perry, is one of the twins that Donis's cousin has, who they're about 4 to 6 years old, I can't remember exactly, in Firekeeper's Daughter. This one is much less of a thriller, I would say, than Firekeeper's Daughter, but there's still elements that keep you hooked. And this, even more so than Firekeeper's Daughter, had me so emotionally invested. And it appeals to that part of me that wants to tell people's story and wants the story to be told accurately and by the people whose story it is. In a series of events, Perry ends up getting involved in the complicated mess that is, where do these different remains and belongings actually, how should they be dealt with? Who should take care of them? Clearly, I fall on the side of these remains, these ceremonial remains, these actual bodies, these skeletons, they belong with the people. They're people. I don't know why my brain is not coming up with the words right now, but there's a lot of Native American indigenous artifacts that are held and displayed in a lot of US museums and private collections, and they are not being turned back over to the tribes, even though there is a federal law in place that dictates that any of these artifacts or remains that were discovered and donated after the passage of the law, which was in the early 1990s, if a tribe makes a claim for them, they need to be returned. Many of them are still not, because these institutions are saying that they're culturally unidentifiable, and we have to trace it back through. We have to jump through all of these hoops to make sure that it's the right tribe that it's going back to. Can you see the sarcasm rolling off of me? There are people in this world, the real world, that they take advantage of those loopholes, labeling them culturally unidentifiable, selling them to private collectors or museums overseas where this law does not apply. There's so many times throughout this that I just got so angry. And I just was like, just stop. You're despicable. Why are you doing this? Why are you holding on to this heritage that is not your own? This is so culturally, religiously important to these people. Stop being bigots and thinking, oh, they're primitive. They don't know how to take care of this. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. You're the ones that don't know how to take care of it. Okay, I'm getting off my soapbox before I go too off the rails here. But I thought that Angeline Boulley, once again, has crafted an incredible story here. I don't know whether or not I like this book better than Firekeeper's Daughter. I think they are both masterpieces. There's still some questions like the identity of Donnis's son's father, which is never mentioned. But anyway, this is phenomenal. Definitely, I'm calling it now. This is the best book I'm going to read this month. It probably will make it onto my top 10 for the year. And my battery is blinking. Last book I've read this week. Fitting timing. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.